Welcome to episode 2 of this Conversation Matters podcast. I'm Dr. Susan Protasio and I'm your host. I'm very passionate about conversations that are insightful. So today we're going to have a thought-provoking conversations about belonging and fitting in, finding our authentic self. So I would like to introduce or welcome our guest. And she is a licensed clinical social worker, serves as Cultural Community Liaison consultant for Riverside University Health System. She is also a diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging consultant. So let's welcome our guest, Dr. Ernelyn Navarro.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for your presence. Appreciate it. I've been wanting to discuss this belonging and fitting in. So can you introduce further yourself to our guests, to our viewers?
So I'm Filipino American and I live here in Southern California. And in addition to my undergraduate and graduate studies in both social work as well as in leadership and management, this topic has been something I'm interested in both personally and professionally. I'm a trained Daring Way facilitator, which is based on Dr. Brene Brown's research on shame resiliency and wholehearted living. And so that's why this is a topic that I often speak about either with clients or with in presentations and workshops.
Yeah. So it's good that you mentioned that, I came across a post in social media from an Asian American Filipina lady, and she said, growing up, I never felt enough. I was caught between family expectations and the need to be perfect, and I do not feel Filipino or American enough. So as a diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging consultant, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, in psychology, Maslow described love and belonging as one of our human needs. And then more recent scholar really talks about belonging as a core of our human needs. So it's right there with food and shelter and safety. So it's not something that we can't live without, really. I mean, we have to belong to a community. As babies, we needed to belong to family to survive, to be fed, to be loved. So it is one that is essential for our existence. I love Dr. Brene Brown's definition of belonging, in that belonging is really about being accepted for who we are. And then fitting in is really about having to change who I am in order to be accepted or to be a part of some, a group or with other people.
Sometimes I'm thinking about it, the belonging and fitting in, because I think it happens to us like every day. The moment you mingle with other people, you are put in that situation of like, probably subconsciously, are you belonging or fitting in? So for our youth, how do they navigate about this belonging and fitting in?
Yeah, well, for our youth, it's challenging because they're still at that developmental age where they're still trying to figure out who they are, so they have to navigate the expectations at home, in schools, with their friends, and in their community. And then they have, trying to explore about, some of these ideal identities, or then trying to figure out like those unwanted identities. They don't want people, for them to think they are. So for our youth, having to figure that out, again, kind of like the quote that you saw, growing up, we're expected to perform, perfect, please other people. And so it's, it takes a while for us to be able to figure out, to come to ourselves and figure that out.
Yeah, because sometimes the family, they expect you, like Asians, they expect you to get good grades, perform at school, like be an honor graduate student. So I think it's hard. So how does the Filipino youth navigate through this intricate concept of belonging and fitting in? Because I think there's some confusion, like they're confused. Okay, do I belong, or am I fitting into this culture? So how do they navigate?
Yeah, this actually, the quote that you gave earlier just resonated with me, because then I was 14 when I graded here. And so it is kind of one of those things where you have that understanding of like I'm not enough, that being able to, am I, not Filipino enough, or
Yeah.
not American
I don't know.
enough, or I'm not pretty enough, or not smart enough. So there's a lot of that insecurity. So I think in time, obviously with experience and gaining additional knowledge and awareness, you have that, but then you definitely also need the support of other people believing in you. Because I think the very core of that whole issue around belonging and fitting in is also worrying about what other people think,
Yeah,
And so when we worry about what other people think, we're always hustling,
You're
to
right.
try to,
Right.
please other people,
Yeah.
as opposed to trying to really come to understand what our own personal values are, what's important to us,
Yes.
understanding what your strengths are, and then being able to have pride in some of that. And then, of course, also leaning into our own struggle, because a lot of times that's the part that we often don't open up
Yeah.
and share with other people,
Yeah.
because we don't want to be seen weak, and we
Yeah.
don't want other people to see that the negative side of us,
Yeah.
but that's who we are. That's part of our
Yeah.
authentic self also. We're both made out of struggles and
Yeah.
strengths, and so we have to embrace that part
Yeah.
of it.
But probably for the younger Filipino, the youth, probably it would take a while for them to be able to adjust or kind of find like, okay, this is the space that I want to be, that I could say that I'm my authentic self, or sometimes probably they find it hard that they have to go to that mode of like, I need to fit in.
Yeah.
You
Well, I
know?
think it really is about being able to give yourself permission,
Yeah.
and the parents, of course, giving them permission to explore what it is,
Yeah.
that they're good at, what
Yeah.
they're interested in, instead of forcing, those
Yeah.
things on them. Like you have to be,
Yeah.
this profession, or you have to do
Yeah.
this. And I know it's interesting, because then I appreciated having the opportunity to say like piano lessons and all those other things. At first, it's like, oh, like, why do I have to? This was something that our parents wanted for us. But then at some point, like you realize, okay, yeah, I do appreciate music, and it's nice to be able to play instrument. But initially you resist some of those things that's forced on you. But then you also then realize, okay, these are different. If you look at it from a lens of, these are different ways that you can experiment and see if this is something you like. And then if you don't like it,
Right.
you give it a try, then
Right.
try something else.
Right. It kind of give them like a leeway to explore, to find their place, their space,
right,
which
yeah.
one is
Yeah.
they want to be in.
Right, yeah. But sometimes we don't give our kids those opportunities
Yeah.
to explore and be curious, because that's really what it
Right.
is. It's trying to figure out who and be comfortable in their own skin.
Right. So
Yeah.
probably that lady that I saw the post, she's saying, she's torn between like the family expectations, the need to be perfect. Probably perfect in the sense that they have to do this, do that according to the standard probably, or the values of the family.
Yeah, see, and then
You know?
so perfectionism is a challenge, right? So for
Yeah.
me, and that is something that's very common in a lot of Asian families, but perfectionism is unhealthy, so because
Right.
it's hard to achieve that. So the difference is that we can try to strive for excellence, which is great. We want to do our best. So having that mindset of striving for excellence versus trying to be perfect,
yeah.
and so that perfectionism part is the part that really will hold us back and add additional mental health,
I know,
issues for
yeah.
us, anxieties, depression, because then that's why, part of what
Yeah.
that person was sharing,
Yeah,
is
and
a
that
challenge.
leads to those mental health issues that the youth encountered
Mm-hmm.
because they're trying to measure to a certain level, which is probably at times is no longer kind of practical or achievable, and it should not be,
Right, yeah.
That's interesting. So how about the place of work? Does Asian Americans encountered any belonging, fitting in issues
Oh yeah,
with
at
the
work,
workplace?
yeah. So with leaders I coach, and then as well as other people I interact with, and personally, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we have that experience of also wanting to fit in
Yeah.
or belong, right? So we need, and some some organizations, they don't have that culture of belonging, so we walk in feeling othered already. So as Asians, because we look different,
we look,
or however we present, whether it's your gender identity or any other way, like if you're the only female in a male dominated field. So it is that wanting to figure out, like, how do we not feel othered? And so the culture in the workplace need to create that sense of belonging also. But personally also, then we need to find a way to feel like that we belong to ourselves, so we can stand our ground, setting those boundaries, and then being clear about what we contribute, and having our voices heard also.
Correct,
in the Filipino culture, we have that value. I mean, we have this pakikisama, right? So in most Asian countries, we have the value of harmony, so trying to get along with other people. And so, but sometimes in that process of getting along with other people and, not wanting to rock the boat, then we end up having to partially not show up as our authentic self or hide, part of who we are. And so it makes it hard, for people to really see all of the gifts and talents that we have to share, or even to know that there are things that, we, could use help with, because then we don't always ask for help, so there's a lot of those other pieces of wanting to, again, be accepted, so then we don't want to show our flaws, so there's a lot of those other issues.
Or sometimes you don't want to be seen as like not knowing or weak, so your tendency is, okay, you just go along or go with the flow, and not like standing on your own authentic self. So just like I remember while you were saying it, I remember when I came here, I was when I was doing my residency training program, at that time, we are classified as foreign medical graduates because I finished my medicine in the Philippines. So now when I came here and doing my residency training, I encountered that at that time, I did not know it was belonging and fitting in. Because as I came here from the Philippines, the way I dress, the way I talk is different from the American culture. So while doing the residency program, I was like observing, okay, that's how they dress. That's how they talk. So slowly, I think I started changing the way I dressed just to fit in. But the good thing is I came here as an adult professional, so I think I'm matured. I have confidence in myself. So I was able to kind of retain my authentic self, even if I'm trying to fit in. So, and now that we're talking about it, I thought, hey, that is belonging and fitting in issue at that time. I think most of us, not just Asian Americans, probably other cultures too experience it. But we don't label it as fitting and belonging issue because you just move on, you go with the day, do whatever you need to do. So,
Well, I mean, there's a lot of different reasons where we feel othered, right? So again, even in different work settings, right? So you and I both have doctorates, but in some work settings, that you still, even with that degree, still feel that you don't belong, depending on, what that work setting might be, or, and then even being as female, again, I've mentioned earlier. So really, there's a lot of those different issues. I know, kind of similar to what you're saying, for me, as a youth, when I migrated here, this whole fitting in was about this notion in our head that was, kind of ingrained in us, that in order to assimilate, we had to assimilate. So meaning there's part of our culture we have to give up in order to fit in. And so there's that struggle of wanting to retain that identity. So it was important for me that I retained it. I want to continue speaking Tagalog, so I still have Filipino friends, but there's that other part of, misunderstanding, I guess, in a way, because at the time that's what we bought into, right? The whole colonial mentality of being Americanized was a good thing for, as far as being successful and adjusting. But then on the flip side, being Americanized in the Filipino community is being seen as a negative thing. So that's why that comment of not being good enough, so not being Filipino enough, but then American on the other side, not being American enough. So, I went to a college. So I was 18, right, when I went to college, and I lived on campus. And a majority is white community, and so it was like trying to navigate, like how do I fit into that? So I had to, like you,
Yes.
had to, dress like them. But
Yes.
then, it's nice to have a small group of Filipino friends where I could retain that, so I could hang out with them and talk to them. But then I felt like I had these two identities, so then I would be with my Filipino friends, hang out and enjoy. And then I would be with the other friends I have was making in the dorms, or I was in a sorority that was mostly white. So then, in that situation, I wasn't showing up as my authentic self, because then I was definitely trying to fit in, because I was trying to figure out what it meant to be an American, as opposed to just saying, like, hey, I'm Filipino. And I happen to, want to be a part of this group. But then, so it's just kind of one of those things that over time, it was really a struggle to try to find that, that identity of who I thought I want to be. And so now, obviously, like it's a process,
it's a
of really finding your authentic self.
So how did you navigate through that complexity? Because our youth, I think, the reason for the occurrence or having mental health issues is like they cannot find the way how to be their authentic self. So what are the things that the youth, Filipino youth or Filipino Asian American youth can do to kind of navigate and see, okay, this is the space I want to be, this is where I could be my authentic self. So how do they cope, or what can they use?
So I think first is being clear on what your values are, what's important to you. So again, some of those values could be the Filipino or the cultural values that we grew up in. And some of them are just things that are important to you, that you develop. So whether it's faith or other things that as you learn in school, so for example, for me, as a social worker, so social justice is a value. That wasn't necessarily something that I learned in the home. Although, of course, it's important as far as fairness and all of that, but it's worded differently, right? So trying to be clear on what your values are. And I think the other part is really that part of not having to worry about what other people think about us, and it's not easy as a youth to not worry about what other people think, and again, it's really, that's why you do need the support of other people and of course your parents and other adults who believe in you and can affirm what your strengths and talents are, because sometimes we still have a lot of that insecurity as youth, and even as adults, right? We still need affirmation from other people.
I think,
but mostly from our own selves, so it's really also making sure that we feel that we belong to our own selves, because then sometimes we don't really even look inside and reflect about, what those things that we bring, what we contribute.
What do you value? What do you value the most that you could be your authentic self? I would like to share this quote by Brené Brown. I saw it and I think it's very, very profound. So I would like to share this quote by Brené Brown. She said that true belonging does not require you to change who you are. It requires you to be who you are. Can you comment on it? What are your thoughts on that quote?
I think, I've been pretty much saying it all along. It's really that, when you're talking about authenticity, again, being very clear about what your values are, also understanding what both your strengths and your struggles. And so, and because again, the whole notion of a lot of times we don't want to be vulnerable and then we don't want to show our weakness and all of that. So being able to know, what some of those things that are challenging for you, or that, that you still need to learn, that you're not perfect, all of those different pieces is really then, being able to show up as your true authentic self, when you're not having to worry about performing, pleasing, and perfecting, So, if we could let go of all those three P's, then it'll be a little bit easier to be our authentic self.
Probably it would take a while for like the younger generation to do it, because it's kind of hard to navigate and find that path. So I wonder, are there resources in the communities that they could go to, or
Yeah, I
help
mean,
them,
there's really a lot of programs that
Yeah.
are geared towards youth, of
Yeah.
course, being able to help them, learn a little bit more about different coping strategies and resiliency skills. Here in the Inland Empire, we have different resources specifically for Asian Pacific that's helpful, like the
Okay.
Asian Pacific Counseling and Treatment Center.
Oh, that's nice.
The
That's
the
nice.
county itself is really geared, like in my role of really trying to provide education and outreach in the community, and then of course for the parents. The parents
Yes.
also, there are specific parenting classes that are geared for Asian parents or Filipino parents to understand how to navigate, retaining the culture, but also at the same time understanding, kind of the different way of parenting
Right.
as opposed to the traditional way
Yes,
that
yes.
sometimes is not as healthy.
Yeah, because the traditional way is what we were, learned way back in the Philippines. But then when you come here, the culture is different, the environment is different, and then I think the youth has different needs compared to the parents' needs. So yeah, that's
Yeah, because then, for the parents, they also have to kind of find their way to be
Right.
their authentic self also,
Yeah.
and it's hard, as well. So it's being able to educate everyone in the family in that sense.
Yeah. So what are, as a, you know, being in the community, what is the most common, I would say, causes or issues that you encounter with the youth regarding belonging and fitting in, like the core, like a majority of the youth? What are those, like, that you encounter about their adjustment to belonging or finding their way?
Yeah, well, it's hard, I think, with this generation, with the youth, when there's a lot of we're relying on social media, and so trying to figure out sometimes how you present yourself in the social media
Yes.
is that ideal self versus your authentic self.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of, that's the other layer of wanting to be liked, and how many likes that you get, and how like how many views that you're
I
getting.
know.
So there's that other layer, to add to this generation that makes it challenging to really try to figure out your authentic self. If you're having to rely on the
What the
social
others,
media to
yes.
validate you versus having friends that you can trust, or that
Right.
having your family be the support that can give you that validation and the support, and also that, again, the opportunity to allow you to explore and be curious to figure out who
Yeah.
you are. So there's a lot of anxiety with our youth today because of some of those trend that we have with having to rely on
Yeah.
social media
Yeah,
to
because-
try to
yeah,
get that
because
validation.
it gives you the validation that they're craving, but at the same time, it's not the authentic validation, depending probably on, the values of the other person that's validating them. So,
Well, yeah, because then the other side of that comes with what you do get is some of the criticism, and so the not so positive, or definitely
Right.
not so pleasant, and then the negative comments, and that's kind of
yeah.
diminishes
Yeah.
our value,
Yeah.
and impacts our self-esteem. So it's one of those things that needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
And then of course there's obviously bullying, both
Yeah,
in school and then online. So a lot of those things are what our kids are having to go through, to find their authentic self. But I think with, again, good support, people they can trust,
Correct.
both in school, with adults as well as friends, then
They should be good. They should be
well,
able
I mean,
to,
it's
to navigate
giving
through
them
it.
the space where, again, creating that sense of belonging in the community, at home, and so that they can figure out their own way of how they can belong to themselves,
Right.
as well as in those different, groups that they're part of. Yeah.
So if you would say something like an advice or something to the Filipino youth or to the Asian American youth, what would it be? regarding belonging and fitting in?
So it takes a lot of courage to really navigate and figure out not having to worry about what other people think. So and then being able to then find that, you know,
Yeah.
authentic self for you. So
Yeah.
it takes courage, but that's one. It's worth it because
Yeah.
then you feel your whole self.
Right,
You
right.
know, so.
And then as you move forward and you are your authentic self, it makes you happy because you are pursuing things that are that aligns to your values. I think that would help being authentic. So this is a very thought-provoking conversation. So thank you so much for your presence. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. There's a lot more to talk about. I know we don't have that much time, but
I
it's,
know,
yeah,
I know.
yeah.
So, and then, so before we end this episode, I would like to leave you with this question. Are you choosing to be your authentic self and allow people to see you for who you are? So let us know. You could email us at convomatters@yahoo.com if you have suggestions, comments. And thank you for listening. We appreciate your listening to these thought-provoking conversations. And our next episode, we would be discussing another insightful topic, and that would be about understanding immigration trauma. So thank you for listening, and take care and blessings.